이 시간에 들어오신 여러분들을 환영합니다. 이 시간의 주제는 연구 시작 전 효과적인 질문이 먼저다입니다. 연구 성공을 위한 첫 단계가 바로 연구 질문을 설계하는 것이죠. 이 시간에도 제임스 그린 교수님 나와 계십니다. 교수님은 외국인으로서 한국에서 박사학위를 취득하면서 다양한 연구를 진행한 유경험자입니다. 이 경험담을 잘 버무려서 연구 질문 설계 꿀팁을 소개해드리고자 합니다. 교수님, 어떻게 해야 효과적인 연구 질문을 작성할 수 있을까요? 그리고 연구 질문을 제대로 만드는 것이 왜 그렇게 중요할까요?
Well, an effective research question is one that is clear, focused, but most importantly, researchable. I remember when I was working on my dissertation, I spent weeks refining my questions, as it really set the stage for my entire research. A good research question should guide the study, keep you on track, and ensure that you don't get lost in too many directions. It should be specific enough to explore in depth, but also broad enough to make a meaningful contribution to the field. The right question is like a compass that leads the way through the research process. If not well defined, the whole dissertation can lose its focus.
연구 질문이 연구가 곁가지로 새어나가지 않게 꽉 잡아주는 역할을 하는군요. 그렇다면 연구 질문을 설계하는 과정에서 학생들이 흔히 저지르기 쉬운 실수는 무엇일까요?
One of the biggest mistakes I see, especially with students, is starting with a question that is too broad. When I started my dissertation, my initial question was way too general. Something like, what is the impact of computational thinking on education? It was overwhelming to even know where to begin with answering that question. I quickly learned that narrowing down is key. Another common issue is being too narrow. Choosing a question based on a small, specific interest can mean finding that there's hardly any research or data available. It's a tough realization. A research question needs to have enough existing literature to support it, but it shouldn't be so specific that there's nothing to build on. It's not easy to do, but a student needs to find that sweet spot between too broad and too narrow. It's critical to strike that balance early on.
연구 질문을 너무 넓게 잡거나 너무 좁게 잡지 않는 것이 좋다는 말씀을 해주셨는데요. 그렇다면 어떻게 본인의 연구 목적과 부합하게 연구 질문을 만들어낼 수 있을까요?
This is something I struggled with at first, but I learned that you can't just come up with a research question out of nowhere. It has to tie directly into your thesis or central argument. For example, in my own dissertation on computational thinking, my initial question wasn't aligned with my thesis. I had to keep refining my question until it was more specific and relevant to my argument. I always tell students to think of a research question as a tool to help answer the thesis or problem they're exploring. If the question doesn't directly relate to the central aim, it's time to go back and reassess. It can be very helpful to talk to your advisor regularly to make sure that you stay on focus and you see the bigger picture of your research.
지도교수와 정기적인 만남이 참 중요하다는 말씀을 해주셨는데요. 아무래도 저를 자주 만난 지도학생들이 방향을 잃지 않고 큰 그림을 그리면서 잘 나아가는 것 같습니다. 자주자주 지도교수님 방을 두드리세요. 자, 그렇다면 연구 질문을 좁혀가는 전략이나 방법을 소개해 주시겠어요?
One effective strategy is to start broad and then narrow it down as you review the literature. For my research on computational thinking, I initially had a list of potential questions. However, as I kept reading studies and articles, I found that teachers were uncertain on how to incorporate computational thinking practices into the classroom. So I adjusted my aims to be a self-study and included a fourth question about developing materials for teachers to use. I found it helpful to discuss my ideas with my advisor. Peer feedback and advisor input are invaluable when refining your question over time.
네, 마지막으로 잘 만들어진 연구 질문의 예시를 한번 들어주시죠.
Well, for an example, let's consider a problem we're going to try and answer. And let's imagine that that problem is immigrants often struggle after moving to a new country. A good first question might be, what services are available to immigrants in the city and how can awareness of those services be increased? This question is very specific. It focuses on two clear, measurable aspects. It has relevance, as the accessibility of services is an important issue for immigrants. It's also feasible, as answering the question is achievable, as it involves identifying services and then understanding the barriers that immigrants are facing. The question is also good because it's of great significance, as the results can be used to inform future policy for decision makers and by making practical recommendations.
자, 이렇게 해서 오늘 연구 질문을 어떻게 효과적으로 만들 것인가 하는 꿀팁을 들어봤습니다. 열심히 참여해 주셔서 감사합니다.